It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is cling. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear cling used is to mean to hold tightly to someone or something. With this particular definition, my mind kind of went to the movies or TV shows, particularly action ones, where maybe someone is holding tightly to the ledge or edge, maybe a window, trying not to fall from something, right? Then you can kind of picture that idea of holding tightly. So we might say they're clinging to the edge or clinging to the window. A second way you hear the verb cling used is to mean to stick to something and/or be hard to remove from another object. So with this definition, what came to my mind, recently I was washing some dishes and there was some grime, some grease on a particular pan. It just did not want to come off. So I thought of that. It was sticking to the pan. It was really hard to remove. It was clinging to the pan. A third way you might hear the verb cling used is to mean to remain very close to someone or something. With this definition, I thought of a story recently. So my parents were babysitting or watching my 18-month-old nephew, and they took him to the library for a little story time. And there were many other little kids around his age, and they were trying to encourage him to go play with the kids. And he would not leave their side. He remained very close, or we might say he clung to my parents. A fourth way you might hear the verb cling used is to mean to remain persistently or stubbornly faithful to some idea, person, or sometimes kind of like an intangible thing, something you cannot touch. Right? So with this, you might think of someone who has a particular belief, and even though they've been shown other evidence that proves maybe this is not true, it's not accurate, they still, I believe it. I'm staying true to this. You can't change my mind. It's that idea that describes this particular action. A fifth way you hear the verb cling used is to mean to be emotionally dependent on someone. So with this definition, many times this is used to talk about adults in a rather negative way. When one adult seems emotionally dependent on another person, so that other person's mood, their thoughts, their feelings really control how that other person acts and interacts with the rest of the world. It can be thought of as kind of a negative thing. It might have a slightly different meaning if we were talking about a child or someone who isn't sort of thought of as being capable of being independent. You should know that cling is an irregular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I'm going to do is add ing to form clinging. The past tense and participle forms of this verb require a spelling change. I'm going to change the vowel I to a U, and that makes clung. Clung is both the past tense and the participle form of this verb. Okay. Now, with all of these definitions and meanings we've just talked about, I want to note that it's most common to see to following this verb. And that's with all 5 of these definitions. It doesn't really create different definitions. So there aren't any phrasal verbs I feel like we need to study or discuss connected to this verb. And instead, we can focus on making some example sentences today in the simple past tense and the present perfect progressive. We'll start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to talk about actions that were completed at a known point in the past. Sometimes in these sentences, you'll see time signals, words like yesterday, or a phrase like last week, or maybe even a specific date in the past. Okay? But you won't see time signals in every simple past tense sentence. Sometimes they are implied as part of a conversation. If I ask somebody what they did yesterday, they don't have to use yesterday back in their answer. I'm going to assume that's what they're talking about because I just asked about it. You might also notice this in longer passages. A specific date is mentioned at the beginning, and then it's sort of understood what we're talking about. Now, to make simple past tense sentences in the affirmative, we're going to have our subject, and then we're going to have our irregular past tense verb. You can see that in my example. The home team clung to their 2-1 lead during the second half. So with this particular sentence, my mind went to football and this idea that like a team was really trying to hold on or hold tightly to this lead, not allow another goal to be scored. If I want to make a negative simple past tense sentence, my structure will be to, again, start with my subject, right? But now I'm going to use did, not, and then the base form of my verb. So I'm going to go back to cling. You can see that in my example sentence. This product didn't cling to any containers as it had been advertised. So here, I might have been talking about something I wanted to stick to something, and for whatever reason, the substance it's just not working. It's not sticking. It's not clinging. Okay. And hopefully you're noticing in the affirmative, negative, and now the yes or no question, my structure is the same no matter what my subject is. So it's one of the few verb tenses where we don't have any small changes to the structure. Okay? But let's look at making yes or no questions. Okay? To do this in the simple past tense, I start with did, then I have my subject, and then the base verb. So notice the irregular form of this verb, clung, C-L-U-N-G, it's only being used in the affirmative. Okay? Here's another example sentence. Did wet snow cling to the trees after the storm yesterday? Right? So we're kind of wanting to know, did it stick to the tree? Now let's talk about present perfect progressive. Some teachers in some books will call this the present perfect continuous, and I always tell students that's fine. It means the exact same thing. I like calling this the present perfect progressive because the 3 P's help me remember I need 3 parts to make my verb. Okay? So in my sentences here, I'm going to use my subject, then I'm going to use have or has, and I'll use been, and then the ing form of the verb. And I'm using this verb tense mainly to note an action that started in the past. It's continuing into the present, and I'm really quite often sort of focused on how long this has been going on. An example sentence here. An employee shot during the robbery has been clinging to life in the hospital. Okay? This is a sad sentence, but you might be able to kind of visualize that idea of someone sort of fighting to continue to live. That's what's being described in this particular sentence. So employee here is singular. That's why you see has been clinging. Okay? If it had been 2 or more, then we would have changed and used have been clinging. Now, to make negative present perfect progressive, again, I pay attention to my subject. I use have or has, but then I use not, and then been, the participle, B-E-E-N, and then the ing form the verb. Here's another example sentence. Some large companies haven't been clinging to coal for energy security for several years now. That might be sort even to having like a firm belief that one can't shake. Many companies, many governments even, have really sort of strong points of view on certain topics. They might be unwilling to change how they've always been doing something. But here, this sentence is noting that we do have some people who are maybe willing to abandon a previous idea they had, to have or utilize different forms of energy. Maybe it's solar or wind as examples. Now let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect progressive. To do this, I start with have or has, then I have my subject, then the participle been, and then the ing form the verb. Here's another example. Has the child been clinging to her father after the death of her mother and brother? So here, that might be that emotional dependence. It could also be the physical kind of staying close. I wouldn't say this has all that negative of a meaning, though, because it looks like there's been a great tragedy. A child has lost her mother and brother, and so we might understand that idea of wanting to stay close, possibly being afraid of ever separating from her father, and at the risk he could also be lost. So there are some examples. I hope that has help you understand our verb just a little bit better. But now let's spend some moments looking at words that are related to our verb cling. And the first word we're going to look at is the noun clinger. This is a person who clings. Okay. Now, I want to note this is a pretty informal word, and many times it's used in connection to relationships. So calling someone else's significant other a clinger usually has a pretty negative connotation. It goes back to that idea of being emotionally dependent. This is someone who never wants to be separated, maybe can't make a decision without talking to the other person. Again, it has pretty strong negative meanings in American culture. So an example of this noun in a sentence might be, she always dates clingers who are incredibly insecure. So here, the sentence kind of criticizing a person's choice in maybe boyfriends or significant others, as it may be. And the people she chooses are people who are either emotionally dependent or not willing to be physically separate all that often. Another related word you might hear is the adjective clingy. Okay? All this adjective means is likely to cling. So this could describe a person, an animal. It could describe an article of clothing. So this could be the, again, emotional, staying close, staying dependent kind of a thing, or it could be that idea of like physically not separating. So I have a couple examples of this to hopefully help us understand this. His dog is so clingy, right? Might mean the dog never wants to be away from his owner, right? Doesn't want to be in a different room, doesn't want to go outside alone. That would again, kind of fit the definition. Another example sentence, don't wear anything too clingy to the office. So here, this might be referring to really tight-fitting clothing, something that is maybe almost to the point where it's inappropriate. Okay. Another thing we're going to talk about today is the noun cling wrap or cling film. This might not sound familiar to you, but you might have seen it. So it's generally what we call like a very thin plastic film, and it's used to seal containers or seal food in order or in hopes that it's going to keep it fresh longer. I've got a couple pictures here that I think might help with this idea. So perhaps you've seen these boxes. They have the plastic you kind of tear and rip off. And then I have a plate of food that's covered in what looks to me like cling wrap. Sometimes people will just shorten this to cling. But an example, do you want me to cover the leftovers in cling wrap? Maybe you would say this if you're helping clean up after a meal at someone's house. Okay. Well, I hope this video helps you better understand the verb cling. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.